Something happened in the Persian Gulf that the Pentagon does not want you to think too carefully about. An American destroyer, one of the most advanced warships ever built, packed with missile defense systems, radar arrays, electronic countermeasures, the kind of hardware that is supposed to make it essentially untouchable, took a direct hit. And then another one did. And then another, not because Iran got lucky, not because of some sudden leap in Iranian military technology, but because someone told them exactly where to look. Think about what that means for a second. These are not stationary targets. These are warships moving through open water, constantly changing position, running electronic countermeasures, surrounded by defensive systems designed specifically to prevent exactly what happened to them. For a missile or a drone to find that ship and hit it cleanly, you do not just need a weapon. You need intelligence. Real-time, precise, operationally decisive intelligence. The kind that tells you not just where the ship is, but where it is going to be by the time your weapon reaches it. The kind of intelligence that Iran, under decades of sanctions, cut off from Western technology, running an independent surveillance apparatus that simply does not have that capability, should not have been able to produce on its own. So where did it come from? That is the question. And the answer to that question does not just explain what is happening in the Persian Gulf right now. It explains the entire architecture of the world that we are living in, because what we are watching unfold in real time is not a regional conflict between the United States and Iran. It is something far larger, far more dangerous, and far more consequential than that framing suggests. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, the pieces are going to fit together in a way that the official briefings from Washington are working very hard to prevent. The confirmation did not come from sources that anyone can wave away as enemy propaganda. It came from the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Associated Press, and Reuters, all reporting simultaneously, all citing multiple American intelligence officials with direct access to classified assessments. 3 officials with direct knowledge of the intelligence described it to the Washington Post in terms that were specific enough to be stunning. Russia is sharing real-time satellite coordinates with Iran, the precise locations of American warships in the Gulf, the positions of aircraft stationed at coalition bases across the region, priority target rankings, which installations to hit first, which assets to neutralize, what specific equipment to use against each category of target. And the word that American officials themselves use to describe the quality of this intelligence is the word that you need to sit with. They called it exquisite, not adequate, not useful, not solid, exquisite. That word is a term of art in the intelligence community. It means precisely calibrated, unusually detailed, and operationally decisive. It means that when an Iranian missile lifts off toward the Persian Gulf, it is not guessing. It already knows where its target is, what the defensive posture around that target looks like, and exactly where the vulnerabilities are. That intelligence is coming from Russian military satellites and surveillance systems, technology that Iran, because of decades of Western sanctions, does not and cannot possess independently. Now, the conflict that began with American and Israeli strikes on Iranian territory has become something categorically different. What we are watching is a direct proxy confrontation between 2 nuclear-armed powers. Russia is not firing missiles at American ships, but Russian intelligence is directing Iranian missiles to American ships. The legal and diplomatic distinction between those 2 things is significant. The operational effect is identical. When a Russian satellite tracks an American carrier strike group, transmits those coordinates to Moscow, and Moscow passes them to Tehran in real time, the missile that leaves Iran and finds that carrier is, in every meaningful military sense, guided by Russian hands. The person pulling the trigger is Iranian. The person telling them where to aim is Russian. To understand why Russia made this decision, you have to understand what Russia has been saying loudly and consistently for the past 5 years. Because the symmetry here is not accidental. It is deliberate. It is surgical, and it is a message. Throughout the conflict in Ukraine, Russia's most persistent argument to anyone who would listen was this: Ukrainian forces are hitting targets inside Russian territory using coordinates provided by NATO intelligence. Western satellites are tracking Russian positions. Western analysts are processing that data, and Western targeting packages are being handed to Ukrainian crews before they launch. Moscow argued repeatedly and with considerable logic behind it that if you are providing the eyes that find the target and the brain that decides how to hit it, then you are not a passive supporter. You are an active participant in the war. That argument was dismissed in Washington. The official position became that providing targeting data is not the same as pulling the trigger. That intelligence support does not constitute direct military involvement. That there is a meaningful difference between giving someone the coordinates and firing the weapon yourself. Russia has now applied that exact logic in the opposite direction with the precision of someone who has been waiting for the right moment to do it. They are providing Iran with targeting data for strikes against American military assets. They are not firing the weapons. Iran is. By the standard that Washington itself established and defended in Ukraine, Russia is simply providing intelligence support to a partner nation. Moscow took America's own argument, reversed the polarity, and is now using it to justify doing to the United States Navy in the Persian Gulf precisely what Washington did to Russian forces in Ukraine. It is one of the most audacious strategic reversals in modern military history, and Washington cannot call it out without dismantling its own justification for everything it did in Ukraine. The person who could most effectively challenge this equivalence and therefore most credibly push back against Russia's behavior is the Commander-in-Chief of the United States military. So when a reporter, not from a hostile network but from Fox News, asked Donald Trump directly in a press conference whether he was aware that Russia was providing Iran with the coordinates being used to strike American military assets, the world was watching to see what the most powerful military commander on earth would say. He called it a stupid question and immediately pivoted to talking about college athletes. The White House press secretary, asked the same question separately, responded that it frankly does not matter. Let that response be examined with the seriousness it deserves. American warships have been struck. A destroyer has been put out of commission. A bomber has been taken out of action. The USS Abraham Lincoln absorbed a salvo of over 100 missiles. The American military base in Bahrain has been effectively destroyed. And the official position of the administration is that the source of the targeting intelligence used to achieve all of this does not matter. One sitting Republican congressman went so far as to say publicly that most Americans consider this irrelevant. The ruling party's official posture is that Russian intelligence directing missiles at American naval vessels in the Persian Gulf is irrelevant. That is where American political discourse currently stands, and it is worth sitting with that for a moment before moving further. The reason Washington cannot say what it knows is not difficult to understand. Publicly condemning Russia for providing targeting coordinates to Iran would require the administration to acknowledge the direct parallel with Ukraine. It would force a confrontation with Moscow at a moment when the United States is already stretched across two major conflict theaters and watching its Middle Eastern coalition fracture country by country. And it would require Trump to stand up in front of cameras and tell the American public that Russia is helping kill American sailors. He is not going to do that. So the official position is that it does not matter, even as the ships burn. Now look at Russia's strategic calculation, because this decision did not come from emotion or impulse. It came from a cold-blooded assessment of what cannot be allowed to happen. The survival of the Iranian state is, from Moscow's perspective, a non-negotiable strategic interest. If the United States defeats Iran and achieves its objectives in the region, the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes, through which roughly 80% of China's oil imports move, would come under effective American control. That outcome gives Washington a chokehold over the energy supply of both Russia's most critical economic partner and the most significant long-term challenger to American global dominance. Neither Moscow nor Beijing can permit that outcome. The stakes are too permanent and too large. Russia also has an immediate bilateral interest that goes beyond the geopolitical. Iran and Russia signed military cooperation agreements involving air defense systems capable of intercepting advanced aircraft and cruise missiles. The activation of that partnership in real combat conditions is not simply a favor to an ally. It is a live field test of Russian military technology against the most sophisticated Western hardware and operational doctrine currently deployed anywhere on Earth. Every Iranian intercept of an American missile, every drone that penetrates American air defenses, every ship that absorbs a hit, all of it generates real-time data that Russian military engineers are studying and feeding back into their own development programs. This conflict is the most comprehensive live evaluation of Russian versus American military technology since the Cold War, and Russia is conducting it without putting a single soldier in the field. China's role in all of this is being systematically underreported, and it is essential to understanding the full picture. Beijing is maintaining a deliberately low profile. No dramatic announcements, no military deployments, no public statements that could be characterized as direct involvement. What China is doing instead is economic and industrial, and in some respects more consequential than anything Russia is doing. Beijing continues purchasing Russian and Iranian oil at scale using local currencies and bilateral arrangements that bypass the dollar entirely. And more critically for the military dimension, China is the source of the microelectronics that go into Iranian drones. The Shahed series drones that have become perhaps the most feared and most discussed weapon system in this conflict are manufactured using Chinese source components. Without that supply chain, Iranian drone production slows dramatically. With it, the production line runs continuously and the stockpiles grow. China is not firing drones at American ships, but Chinese components are in every drone that is. The circularity of this situation has become almost too precise to believe. The United States has reportedly turned to Ukraine for advice on countering Iranian drones, because Ukrainian forces have the most extensive real-world experience dealing with the exact same drone systems that Russia deployed against them. America is asking the country it armed against Russia how to counter the weapons that Russia helped develop, that China helped build, that Iran is now using against American ships. Every thread in this conflict runs back to the same set of interdependencies that Washington spent years pretending did not exist. Now, the ground invasion question, because it is no longer theoretical and the implications are severe. Reports from NBC and multiple regional outlets indicate that Trump has privately expressed interest in deploying ground troops inside Iranian territory for what are being described as strategically specific missions. The context for this is the apparent failure of the Kurdish destabilization strategy. The plan to use Kurdish forces to generate internal instability within Iran, fracture its territorial cohesion, and create the kind of internal pressure that might force regime change from within. That plan has not worked. Multiple attempts to activate it have reportedly failed. And when an air campaign is not producing the desired results and the proxy destabilization strategy has collapsed, the institutional pressure to consider a ground option increases. No order has been signed. That needs to be stated clearly. But the fact that senior American officials are confirming that ground deployment is being discussed seriously, that it is on the table and being war-gamed, that itself represents a significant escalation in the planning environment. Because a ground deployment into Iran is not a surgical operation. It is an invasion of a country of 90 million people with a deeply motivated military terrain that is extraordinarily hostile to mechanized operations, and a population that has spent 4 decades being told that American forces represent an existential threat to their nation and their way of life. Air campaigns are politically sustainable as long as the casualties remain asymmetric. The moment American soldiers start coming home in flag-draped coffins from Iranian soil, the domestic political equation shifts completely and permanently. Trump has midterm elections approaching. Fuel prices are already up 30%. Public support for this conflict was never strong. A ground invasion producing American casualties at scale would not just end the war politically. It could end the administration. And then there is Ukraine, which is now on both sides of this war simultaneously. Ukrainian soldiers are reportedly deployed in the Middle East, advising American forces on drone countermeasures, drawing on their experience facing the exact Russian-supplied Iranian drones on their own territory. And on the other side of the equation, Russia is providing the targeting data that is directing Iranian missiles toward American ships. The war in Ukraine and the conflict with Iran are not separate events happening in parallel. They are nodes in the same network, connected by technology, intelligence sharing, proxy relationships, and the shared strategic calculation of powers that have concluded their interests are best served by ensuring the United States does not emerge from either theater with its military credibility intact. Every Iranian missile that finds an American warship using Russian coordinates is a missile that Russia did not have to fire itself. The cost to Moscow is the transmission of a satellite coordinate. The return on that investment is a degraded American naval presence, an exhausted American military, a fractured American alliance structure, and a global audience watching American power absorb losses it is not willing to publicly acknowledge. That is extraordinary strategic value at essentially zero direct military risk. The United States began this conflict demanding Iran's unconditional capitulation. Weeks later, its ships are operating in the Persian Gulf, knowing that Russia has already given Iran their exact positions. The naval dominance that American power projection has depended on for the better part of a century is being contested in real time. And the official response from Washington is that it does not matter. It matters. And anyone who tells you otherwise is counting on you not thinking too carefully about what is actually happening out there on the water.